Where does the electricity come from? You've definitely done this. Walked into some crumbling pre-war office building, hacked a terminal, reprogrammed a turret, rode an elevator to the top floor, and at no point stopped to ask yourself, who's paying the electric bill 200 years after the apocalypse? Well, it turns out that pre-war America went absurdly hard on nuclear power. They created fission plants, fusion generators, and fusion cores. The entire country was literally wired to run on atomic energy, and a lot of that infrastructure was automated and hardened to a degree where it just kept going after everyone died. And the evidence is actually in the games themselves. Like in Fallout 3, for example, a ghoul scientist mentions tapping into the underground power lines that are still live and says they're buried all over the wasteland if you know where to look. Or in Fallout 4, where you can literally see sparks jumping off of broken power lines and severed pylons, which means something upstream is probably still generating juice. But whatever it is, it's not unlimited. You see, larger settlements like Diamond City still built their own generators because the pre-war grid can only keep the lights on and your terminal running, but it can't handle anything more power intensive than that, like water purification or heavy machinery. So the electricity is there, just a little unreliable and degraded, understandably so. Why are working vehicles rare in the wasteland despite lots of fuel? You can find oil cans, gas canisters, and fuel containers scattered across practically every map in the franchise. Poseidon Energy ran refineries, pipelines, and filling stations coast to coast, and remnants of all of it are still out there, rusting in the wasteland alongside millions of cars that clearly worked at some point. So you'd think somebody in 200 years would have figured out how to put fuel in a car and turn the key. But here's the thing, pre-war cars didn't run on gasoline. By the time the resource wars drained the world's petroleum supply, the automotive industry had pivoted to nuclear power, mostly relying on fission and a lucky few on fusion cells. Corvega and other manufacturers built their vehicles around fission and fusion-based propulsion, which means all that oil and gasoline sitting around the wasteland is essentially useless for getting a car moving. The actual fuel these vehicles need, fusion cells and fusion cores, can't be manufactured anymore because, well, those who can are pretty much gone, the production facilities to produce them are also gone, and nobody in the wasteland has the technical infrastructure to build precision nuclear components from scratch, except maybe the Institute. But why would they when they can just build machines that use teleportation technology? And whatever fusion cores remain are too valuable to burn on a road trip when they can just power a settlement generator or keep a suit of power armor standing. But even if you solved the fuel problem entirely, 200 years of exposure means the tires have dry rotted and every degradable component has long since passed its shelf life. Chris Avallone, one of the OG developers who worked on the games, estimated about one working vehicle per 200 people in the NCR, but even those were barely faster than a Brahmin caravan. And I guess there's also a design reason Bethesda keeps everyone on foot. Drivable vehicles would gut the exploration loop completely, and the tension of moving through the wasteland is what makes Fallout feel like Fallout. How is there still food after 200 years? You open a cupboard in some bombed-out kitchen, and sitting right there on the shelf is a box of Salisbury steak that's older than most civilizations in the wasteland, and your character just eats it. Not even a hint of hesitation or even pretend to check the expiration date, which raises a fair question. How is any of this still edible after 2 centuries of nuclear hellscape? Well, the answer starts before the war even happened. You see, pre-war America was both paranoid about nuclear annihilation and extremely well-funded. So food companies like Fancy Lads, Blamco, and Dandy Boy engineered their products with preservatives so aggressive that the packaging was essentially a time capsule. Cram, the spam-like canned meat, was manufactured in enormous quantities for military rations, school lunches, and emergency reserves. And its slogan was literally just, "It keeps," which is just great marketing copy on the surface, but upon closer inspection would give Vishen Lakhiani a heart attack. And the federal government was contracting these companies directly to supply civil defense stockpiles too, which you can see in Fallout 4, where a terminal at the federal ration stockpile shows a scheduled Blamco delivery for October 23rd, 2077, the exact day the bombs fell. So the food survived because it was literally built to survive. And here's the funny thing too. The irradiation paradoxically acted as a preservative. No bacteria was able to grow on them because nothing could grow on them. And while this prevented the food from spoiling, it did make them mildly toxic. It's just not fast-acting enough. And so that's a trade-off most starving wastelanders are willing to accept. Now, fresh food does exist from Brahmin herds and NCR sharecropper farms, but the wasteland still leans heavily on pre-war stock to fill the gaps. Why are skeletons lying around everywhere? You can't walk 10 feet in the capital wasteland without tripping over somebody's ribcage. Bathrooms, offices, park benches, under desks. There are bones absolutely everywhere, often posed in ways that tell you exactly how that person spent their last few seconds alive. And after 200 years, not a single person thought to clean them up. 2 separate questions are actually buried in this one, and neither has a clean answer. First, Why doesn't anyone move them? Well, who cares about moving them? You see, everyone's just surviving and doing their best. So there's really no time or incentive to bury people you absolutely know nothing about. Bodies attract feral ghouls and disease, and most settlers are more concerned with not dying today than tidying up someone who died 2 centuries ago. There's no cultural infrastructure for it either. No churches running funeral services, no municipal workers on corpse patrol. If a skeleton isn't in your way, it stays where it fell. Second, why do the bones even still exist? Realistically, they probably wouldn't. Exposed bone in outdoor conditions breaks down significantly within a few decades, and after 200 years in rain, heat, and radiation, most of these skeletons should be powder. The lore never explicitly addresses this, vaguely hand-waving it with radiation and dry conditions as natural preservatives. But the real reason is environmental storytelling. Bethesda uses skeletons to communicate death, history, and tragedy without a single line of dialogue. A skeleton with a toaster and a bathtub tells you everything you need to know about October 23rd, 2077, faster than any terminal entry ever could. What actually happened to the rest of the world? Fallout shows you Washington, D.C. in ruins, Boston as a radioactive war zone, the Mojave baking under a post-nuclear sun, and through all of it, not once does anyone stop and say, hey, what happened to Europe? Or Asia, or literally anywhere else on the planet? Well, the lore keeps the rest of the world deliberately vague, almost frustratingly so, but there are breadcrumbs if you know where to look. Europe and the Middle East tore each other apart in the resource wars before the bombs even dropped, fighting over the last petroleum reserves as the global supply collapsed. China invaded Alaska in 2066, fought an 11-year war with the United States, and was on the defensive with American forces pushing into the mainland right up until everything ended. After the Great War, the biggest hint of Chinese survivors comes from the Xi in Fallout 2 that beached near San Francisco. They came ashore, stripped their sub for parts, built a functioning society in old Chinatown, and modeled their hierarchy after ancient Chinese customs rather than the communist government they'd served under. As for Norway, a Norwegian ship called the FMS Northern Star wrecked outside Boston in Fallout 4, its crew ghoulified and still defending the hull centuries later, speaking Norwegian as they attack you. And in Fallout 3, Alistair Tenpenny crossed the Atlantic from England seeking fortune in America, which either means parts of England are intact enough to produce ambitious opportunists, or they're so bad that irradiated DC looked like a step up. But beyond these scattered fragments, the games give you almost nothing. How does ghoulification actually work? Radiation in the Fallout universe kills almost everyone it touches, but to see someone walking around with no nose, flaking skin, and exposed muscle tissue who's been alive since 2077, the natural question is, why them? And the honest answer is that nobody fully knows. Even 200 years after the Great War, the exact mechanism behind ghoulification is still not understood in-universe. What is known is that it requires a specific combination of intense radiation exposure and individual genetic predisposition. You see, most people just die, but the rare few who survive develop a mutation that triggers extreme regeneration, powerful enough that severed limbs can be reattached and maintain full function. The trade-off is their appearance, which deteriorates into something resembling a burn victim or a walking corpse, depending on how much radiation they absorbed and how quickly. The really terrifying thing about this is the feralization, the process that turns ghouls into mindless, hostile creatures stemming from gradual brain deterioration from the continued radiation exposure. And what determines how long a ghoul holds on before going feral is genuinely interesting. Willpower, for example, matters a whole lot. Ghouls with strong mental focus, a sense of purpose, a strong social circle, or high intelligence tend to resist feralization longer than those who lose their sense of self. Trauma especially can accelerate the process, but then there are the glowing ones. These creatures have absorbed so much radiation, they actively emit it, and their upper lifespan limit appears to be effectively indefinite. Some ghouls from the original war, like Raoul Tejada, are still coherent 200 years later. And ghoulification isn't even limited to humans. Bears, gorillas, and other animals can undergo the same mutation, complete with hair loss, cataracts, and extended lifespans. Who actually dropped the first bomb? This is the single biggest unanswered question in the entire Fallout franchise, and the games have spent decades keeping it that way. On the surface, it looks straightforward. Terminal entries at the switchboard, the former DIA headquarters, lay out a timeline for October 23, 2077. Unidentified submarines spotted off California at midnight. A squadron of possibly Chinese aircraft detected over the Bering Strait by morning, and at 9:13 a.m., the first 4 ballistic missile launches were detected. 4 minutes later, NORAD confirmed missiles in the air. At 9:26 a.m., the president authorized response scenario MX-CN91. Full nuclear retaliation. Roger Maxon's logs say they finally dropped the bomb, and later assumes China will target his location next. So it sounds like China did it, right? But every single record uses vague language. Maxon says they. The switchboard logs confirm birds in the air, but never specify whose birds or where they launched from. The Fallout Bible, written by Chris Avallone, states outright that who struck first is unknown, and that it's not even confirmed whether the bombs came from China or America. Then there's the alien theory. On Mothership Zeta, a glitched audio log, only readable through subtitles, reveals that aliens interrogated a military official about USI-CBM launch codes. Whether they actually obtained them is unconfirmed, but given what we see of their interrogation methods, it's not a stretch. And then Vault-Tec enters the picture. The Fallout TV show heavily implies that the Enclave, working through Vault-Tec and corporate proxies, orchestrated the entire war deliberately, engineering nuclear annihilation to guarantee they'd inherit whatever remained. The Vault-Tec rep in Fallout 4 even drops a suspiciously knowing line. The big kaboom is inevitable, I'm afraid, and coming sooner than you may think, if you catch my meaning. So was it China retaliating against American aggression? Was it the US firing first under the assumption China was about to? Was it a corporate conspiracy designed to end the world on purpose? The answer 200 years later is that nobody actually knows. Why does everyone live in shacks instead of building proper structures? We all know by now that it's been 200 years since the bombs dropped. That's already 2 full centuries of survival, adaptation, and rebuilding. And somehow the best most settlements can manage is a lean-to made of corrugated metal and duct tape. Meanwhile, medieval Europe was building cathedrals with hand tools and no electricity. So what's the excuse? Well, it starts with the materials. There are no factories in the wasteland, which means no mass production of bricks, cement, lumber, or standardized building materials. Everything is salvaged, radioactive trash that's been sitting in the elements for 200 years. Then there's the security problem. Constant raider attacks mean settlements get destroyed faster than they can be properly built. There is genuinely no point in investing weeks into a brick structure if a raider gang with power armor and missile launchers flattens it next Tuesday. And after 200 years of this cycle, the psychology shifts. Survival mode breeds a scavenging mentality, using what's already standing is faster, safer, and requires less exposure to the wasteland than starting from scratch. Why lay a foundation when there's a perfectly good pre-war gas station right there with 3 walls still intact? But the exceptions prove the rule. The NCR and Vault City are places with real security, stable governance, and enough resources to actually invest in infrastructure, and they do develop proper architecture. Diamond City built an entire functioning settlement inside Fenway Park. The Institute built a pristine underground facility with working laboratories. When safety and resources exist, people build. But on the meta side, the ruined aesthetic is a deliberate Bethesda design choice. The world has to feel perpetually apocalyptic for the gameplay loop to work, which is partly why fans keep debating whether the timeline even makes sense anymore. And that's everything you've wondered about Fallout Explained. What still confuses you about the Wasteland? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Fallout lore dive.